Something important just happened in Cleveland, and it didn't come from a press conference, a tweet, or a breaking news banner. It happened behind closed doors. As head coaching candidates started walking into interviews, Jimmy Haslam made something very clear early in the process. This wasn't an open-ended rebuild. This wasn't a bring-your-own-quarterback situation. And this definitely wasn't another reset button year. The Browns are preparing to move forward with Shedeur Sanders. That message alone changes everything. Instead of asking candidates who they want at quarterback, ownership is reportedly flipping the script. The real question being asked is simple but revealing. Can you work with Shedeur Sanders? Do you believe in his skill set? Can you build an offense around him? Can you develop him with the pieces already in place? And that question immediately separates serious candidates from the rest. Because some coaches want total control. Some want to draft their guy. Some want to reshape the roster from the ground up. But Cleveland doesn't have the cap flexibility, the draft positioning, or the appetite to do that again. Ownership knows it, and now candidates are being told up front what the reality is. That's why this moment matters more than fans realize. Once an owner signals commitment to a quarterback, the coaching hire becomes a reflection of that belief. The system, the staff, the patience, the excuses, all of it disappears. And that's where one name keeps surfacing. A name that divides fans but excites front offices. A coach known for innovation, confidence building, and quarterback-friendly systems. Mike McDaniel. If Cleveland truly believes in Shedeur Sanders, the next decision will show whether that belief is real or just talk. This is the part that tells you Cleveland isn't just talking anymore. When Jimmy Haslam starts checking the temperature with coaching candidates, it's not casual conversation. It's a filter. And the way this is being handled says a lot about where the organization actually stands. Instead of letting candidates walk in and pitch their own quarterback plans, Haslam is reportedly setting expectations immediately. Before scheme, before staff, before philosophy, the question comes early. What do you think of Shedeur Sanders? Can you develop him? Can you build around his strengths? Can you commit to giving him a real opportunity? That's not a suggestion, that's a boundary. And boundaries change power dynamics fast. In a typical coaching search, candidates walk in with leverage. They sell vision, they promise transformation. They often want control over the most important position on the field. But in this case, Cleveland is flipping the leverage. They're saying, this is the quarterback. If that's a problem, this isn't the job for you. That alone tells you ownership believes the constant resets have been part of the problem. Some candidates are naturally going to bristle at this. Veteran coaches often want autonomy. They want the freedom to draft or acquire their guy. Others want to bring in their own general manager or reshape the roster entirely. By drawing a line early, Cleveland is quietly eliminating those options without public drama. And that's intentional. The Browns don't have the flexibility to start over again. Cap space is tied up. Draft capital is limited. Public patience is gone. Ownership understands that another full reset would mean years of excuses, and they're clearly not interested in selling that anymore. What makes this approach notable is that it forces honesty. A candidate who doesn't believe in Shedeur can't hide behind coach speak. They either buy in or they walk. There's no room for "we'll evaluate later" or "competition will decide." The expectation is development, not deferral. And that matters for Shedeur too. For the first time since entering the league, the message appears consistent from the top down. He's not being treated as a placeholder. He's being treated as a direction. That doesn't guarantee success, but it does guarantee clarity. And clarity has been missing in Cleveland for a long time. But drawing the line creates consequences. Once you commit to a quarterback, every other decision gets measured against that choice. The margin for error shrinks. The next hire can't just be qualified, they have to be aligned. And that's why the coaching search is suddenly getting very interesting. Here's the uncomfortable truth the Browns can't escape, no matter how loud the noise gets. There is no clean restart available. For years, Cleveland operated like a franchise that could just hit reset whenever things got messy. New quarterback, new coach, new plan. But the current situation doesn't allow for that kind of flexibility anymore, and the front office knows it. The financial reality is the first roadblock. The Cleveland Browns are tied up at quarterback financially, whether fans like it or not. Large guaranteed money limits what you can realistically do in free agency. Bringing in another expensive veteran isn't just unlikely, it's borderline impossible without creating bigger problems elsewhere on the roster. Then there's the draft. Cleveland doesn't have the luxury of sitting at the very top of the board, where elite quarterback prospects are easy to access. Trading up would require capital the team doesn't have, and reaching for a quarterback later in the draft only repeats the same gamble they've already taken multiple times before. The organization has lived that movie. It doesn't end well. That's why the idea of simply adding another quarterback sounds better in theory than in practice. It ignores context, it ignores timelines, and it ignores how development actually works in the NFL. What Cleveland does have is a young quarterback already inside the building, one who's been in meetings, one who knows the system, one who's already endured instability and still kept his head above water. Walking away from that without fully committing to development would be wasting the one asset that actually aligns with their current window. That's the part fans sometimes miss when they talk about options. Options require resources. Options require time. Options require patience from ownership and the fan base. Cleveland is low on all three. The path forward isn't about finding the perfect quarterback. It's about maximizing the one they already invested in. That's why the messaging from ownership matters so much. By telling coaching candidates they'll be working with Shedeur, Cleveland is acknowledging reality instead of chasing hypotheticals. They're choosing a direction that matches their constraints, not their frustrations. And that's a shift. Because in the past, the Browns would have sold hope through replacement. This time, they're selling belief through development. That doesn't guarantee wins, but it does reduce chaos. Once you accept there's no real reset button, the conversation changes. The focus moves from who's next to how do we build. And that's exactly why the next decision, the coaching hire, carries so much weight. Once Cleveland committed to a direction at quarterback, the coaching search stopped being wide open. It narrowed fast. Because when you walk into an interview knowing the quarterback is already chosen, the conversation changes. This is no longer about tearing things down or installing an entirely new vision. It's about fit, adaptability, and belief. And that immediately reshapes who makes sense for the job. For years, head coaching searches around the league have been dominated by control-driven candidates. Coaches who want roster authority. Coaches who want to handpick their quarterback. Coaches who want patience to rebuild in their image. That archetype doesn't align with where the Cleveland Browns are right now. Cleveland doesn't need a philosopher, they need a builder. That's why candidates who insist on drafting their guy at quarterback are quietly being filtered out. Not publicly, not dramatically, just naturally. If a coach can't envision success with Shedeur, the conversation doesn't go much further. And that's a big shift from how things used to work. In the past, Cleveland often catered to coaches. Hopping authority would bring stability. This time, ownership is signaling that stability comes from alignment, not autonomy. The quarterback is part of the foundation. The job is to make it work. That also explains why certain big-name fantasies don't hold up under scrutiny. Veteran coaches with Super Bowl rings often want immediate control and proven systems. They want certainty, not development projects. That doesn't mean they're bad coaches. It just means the timelines don't match. Cleveland's current path requires patience mixed with urgency, not ego-driven overhaul. The front office is looking for someone who sees Shedeur as moldable, not limiting. Someone who believes quarterback confidence is built through structure, not pressure. Someone who understands that offensive design can elevate talent rather than expose it. That mindset automatically elevates a certain type of candidate. Innovators rise, collaborators rise, coaches who view quarterback development as a process, not a verdict rise, and those who need full control over personnel decisions quietly fall out of contention. What makes this moment important is that it forces honesty on both sides. Cleveland has to admit what they can and can't do. Coaching candidates have to admit what they are and aren't willing to work with. There's no hiding behind "we'll see." And that's why the next name to gain traction isn't random. It's the natural result of a process that's suddenly more focused than it's been in years. Once you commit to quarterback, you don't just hire a coach. You hire a philosophy. Once you understand the direction Cleveland is taking, it becomes easier to see why one name keeps surfacing behind the scenes. Mike McDaniel. At first glance, his name feels polarizing. Some fans hear it and immediately hesitate. Others lean in. And that split reaction is exactly why his candidacy is gaining traction internally while sparking debate publicly. McDaniel represents a very specific type of coach, one that fits the Browns' current reality almost too well. He's not a tear-it-all-down guy. He's not a control freak who needs final say over every personnel move. And he's not someone who walks into a room demanding a brand new quarterback before the conversation even starts. His reputation is built on adaptation, offensive creativity, and building systems around what he already has. That matters because Cleveland isn't shopping for promises anymore. They're shopping for solutions. And McDaniel's resume suggests he understands how to work within constraints instead of fighting them. What also separates him from other candidates is how he views offense. McDaniel doesn't design schemes to show how smart he is. He designs them to reduce pressure on quarterbacks. Motion, spacing, timing, easy answers. Those aren't buzzwords, they're tools that help young quarterbacks process faster and play freer. That's why front offices respect him, even when fan opinion is mixed. Some skepticism comes from his previous stop. Fair or not, people remember how things ended more than how they worked when everything was aligned. But that's exactly what makes this moment different. Cleveland isn't asking McDaniel to be everything. They're asking him to be specific. Build the offense, develop the quarterback, collaborate with the staff. And that's a role he's proven he can handle. There's also an emotional layer here that fans sometimes overlook. McDaniel is known for connecting with players. He's transparent. He communicates. He builds trust quickly. That's not fluff. It's crucial when you're asking a young quarterback to reset confidence and grow through adversity. Cleveland doesn't need a disciplinarian right now. They need a teacher. That doesn't mean McDaniel is a guaranteed success. No hire ever is. But when you line up the Browns' constraints, their commitment to Shedeur Sanders, and the type of coach who thrives in that environment, the logic becomes hard to ignore. This isn't hype. It's fit. And whether fans love the idea or hate it, Cleveland's interest in Mike McDaniel says something important. They're prioritizing development over optics. Which raises the next question. Does his track record actually support the belief that he can unlock a quarterback? Because that answer might explain why ownership is willing to take the risk. This is where the Mike McDaniel conversation stops being theoretical and starts becoming very real. Because Cleveland isn't just betting on personality or creativity, they're looking at precedent. When Tua Tagovailoa arrived in the NFL, the narrative around him wasn't flattering. Injury-prone, limited arm strength, too dependent on structure. For years, the debate wasn't about how to build around Tua, it was about when to move on from him. Then McDaniel arrived. What changed was Tua's talent overnight. It was the environment. McDaniel redesigned the offense to work with Tua's strengths instead of exposing his weaknesses. Quick reads, defined progressions, heavy motion to identify coverage, rhythm throws that let the quarterback play fast instead of thinking slow. The result, confidence followed clarity. Under McDaniel, Tua didn't just improve statistically, he looked comfortable, decisive, in control. The offense stopped asking him to be something he wasn't and started amplifying what he already did well. That shift took a quarterback many had written off and turned him into a legitimate franchise investment. That's not accidental. And that's exactly why Cleveland is studying that tape. Because Shedeur Sanders doesn't need to become a superhero to succeed. He needs structure. He needs timing. He needs an offense that creates answers instead of forcing improvisation every snap. Sound familiar? The parallels aren't perfect, but they're close enough to matter. Both quarterbacks process quickly when protected. Both thrive when reads are defined. Both struggle when chaos becomes the default. And both suffered early in environments that didn't prioritize consistency. McDaniel's approach shows what happens when a coach commits to reducing friction instead of increasing pressure. That's why the Browns aren't just looking at win-loss records. They're looking at developmental curves. They're asking whether a coach can change the conversation around a quarterback instead of feeding it. Of course, critics will say the situation in Miami was different. Better weapons, better infrastructure, fair points. But that actually strengthens the argument, not weakens it. McDaniel understands what a quarterback needs to function at a high level. The question for Cleveland isn't whether Shedeur can magically succeed, it's whether they're willing to give him the same clarity. And that's the gamble. If Cleveland hires someone who believes in building that structure, the evaluation of Shedeur finally becomes honest. If they don't, the cycle continues, and no quarterback name will change that. This is why the McDaniel comparison keeps resurfacing, not because of hype, not because of flash, but because Cleveland is searching for proof that development isn't a myth. And McDaniel already has a case study. Even with all the logic lining up, the reaction from Browns fans tells you something important. This isn't a fan base that's unified by optimism anymore. It's a fan base shaped by scars. So when the name Mike McDaniel comes up, the response isn't excitement across the board. It's hesitation mixed with curiosity. And that divide didn't come out of nowhere. For a lot of fans, the problem is McDaniel himself. It's expectations. Once names like John Harbaugh or Mike Tomlin get floated, even briefly, everything else starts to feel like a downgrade. Those are safe names. Ring culture, proven stability, the kind of hires that feel like instant legitimacy. So when reality sets in, and those options aren't actually available, disappointment fills the gap. That's where McDaniel gets caught in the crossfire. Some fans see innovation and upside. Others see risk and unfamiliarity. And in Cleveland, risk fatigue is real. This franchise has tried bold ideas before. Sometimes they flopped spectacularly. So the instinctive reaction becomes defensive. Why not just get someone proven? But that question ignores timing. Cleveland isn't in a position to attract every big-name coach on the market. The roster is talented but incomplete. The cap is tight. The quarterback is young. That combination doesn't scream plug-and-play. It requires buy-in and patience, two things veteran coaches with leverage often don't want to gamble on. That's why the split reaction actually mirrors the organization's crossroads. One side of the fan base wants certainty. The other wants evolution. One wants to feel safe. The other wants to finally escape the loop. What complicates things further is perception. McDaniel isn't loud. He's not authoritarian. He doesn't sell toughness with sound bites. For fans conditioned to equate leadership with intensity, that style can feel misleading, even if it's effective. But modern NFL offenses don't run on volume. They run on clarity. And the fans who support this direction tend to focus on one thing: quarterback development. They're not asking whether McDaniel looks the part. They're asking whether he can build something sustainable around Shedeur Sanders. That's the fault line. This debate isn't really about a coach. It's about identity, about whether Cleveland wants to keep chasing certainty or finally commit to a direction and live with the growing pains. Because whichever side wins this argument, the consequences are real. Once this hire is made, there's no hiding from it. All the debates, all the polling, all the coaching rumors keep circling the same surface-level question. Is Shedeur Sanders the guy? But that's not the question that actually matters right now. The real question is whether the Cleveland Browns are finally willing to do what they've avoided for years: build a real environment for a young quarterback and live with the results. Because quarterbacks don't fail in isolation, they fail in chaos. If Shedeur struggles next season, the answer won't automatically be he wasn't good enough. It'll be whether the Browns gave him what quarterbacks actually need to succeed in the NFL. And historically, that's where this franchise has come up short. Stability, clear messaging, a system designed to help, not test. Those things matter more than raw talent early in a career. For the first time in a long time, Cleveland has an opportunity to run a clean evaluation. One offseason, one system, one clear direction from ownership to coaching staff to quarterback room. No weekly rumors, no who's next chatter, no mixed signals. That's what makes this moment different. If Jimmy Haslam truly commits to Shedeur Sanders, then excuses disappear on both sides. The organization can't hide behind instability, and Shedeur can't hide behind circumstance. That's fair. That's football. But fairness requires discipline. It means resisting the urge to panic after one bad game. It means protecting the quarterback instead of exposing him. It means designing an offense that allows growth instead of demanding perfection. And it means backing that plan publicly, not just in closed-door interviews. That's why the coaching hire matters more than the name itself. A coach who believes in development will treat mistakes as teaching moments. A coach who doesn't will quietly start looking for replacements the moment things get uncomfortable. Cleveland has lived both versions, and the outcomes couldn't be more different. This is the fork in the road. Either the Browns finally align ownership, coaching, and quarterback under one vision, or they repeat the same cycle with a new face and a new excuse. Because if Shedeur fails in a stable, supportive system, then the answer is clear and the organization can move on cleanly. But if he fails in chaos, nothing is learned, and the reset starts all over again. That's the real question no one's asking. Not whether Shedeur Sanders is ready, but whether Cleveland finally is. This is the moment Cleveland can't walk back from. For years, the Cleveland Browns have lived in the space between decisions, never fully committing, never fully resetting, always hedging. Quarterbacks were placeholders. Coaches were temporary. Every season felt like a bridge to something else that never arrived. But what's happening now is different. By signaling to coaching candidates that Shedeur Sanders is the direction, Jimmy Haslam isn't just backing a player. He's forcing alignment. He's telling the building, the fan base, and the league that this is no longer a guessing game. And commitment changes everything. It changes how coaches approach the job. It changes how the locker room responds. It changes how development is measured. Most importantly, it removes the safety net of excuses. If Shedeur succeeds, Cleveland finally breaks free from the cycle that's haunted them for decades. If he struggles in a stable, well-designed system, the organization can move forward with clarity instead of regret. Either outcome provides answers, something the Browns have rarely had. That's why the coaching decision coming next matters so much. If Cleveland hires someone aligned with development, structure, and quarterback confidence, someone like Mike McDaniel, then this becomes a real evaluation year. No noise, no manufactured doubt, no weekly speculation about replacements, just football. But if they waver, if they hedge, if they hire someone who views Shedeur as temporary, then nothing has actually changed. The same cycle will repeat under a new headline. This isn't about guaranteeing success. The NFL doesn't work that way. It's about finally choosing a direction and accepting the consequences that come with it. Winning organizations do that. Losing ones stay stuck in perpetual evaluation mode. Cleveland has tried talent. They've tried money. They've tried splash hires. What they haven't tried consistently is alignment. This offseason is their chance. Because once commitment is real, the conversation shifts. It stops being about who might be next and starts being about what's being built right now. That's how trust is earned. That's how quarterbacks grow. And that's how franchises finally turn the page. So the question is whether Shedeur Sanders deserves the opportunity. The question is whether the Browns are finally brave enough to stand behind one and see it through. Because commitment doesn't guarantee success. But without it, failure is inevitable.